Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're joining us this evening for this ONlit webinar, Teaching Writing with Self-Regulated Strategy Development using thinkSRSD. So we'll just start by acknowledging that ONLIT's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. And with that, I will soon pass it over to our speakers for this evening, our wonderful hosts. We are just so thrilled to have this opportunity to be able to learn from two fabulous educators, Erika Chesnick and Jordan Ingola, both from the Limestone District School Board. Erika is the elementary literacy consultant, and Jordan is a learning partner. And with that, I will mute and I will pass it over to our fabulous hosts and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Una. Thanks everyone for being here on a cold Monday night in what feels like day 472 of winter. We are going to go over all of these things today and wrap up with some Q&A. So keep your questions coming in the chat, and we have some people in the chat who are also manning that. But we're going to get started with cognitive load theory. So one of the main tenets of the thinkSRSD approach to teaching writing is that we need to provide students with knowledge about the topic that they're going to write about. So through this equity lens of instruction, all students have access to and are working with the same material. So along that same vein, if you will indulge Jordan and I tonight, we think it's important that we start today by building a shared understanding of cognitive load theory. Understanding this theory will help drill home some of the science behind the thinkSRSD approach as we move through the next hour together. So this is content from a slide that was adapted from an ONlit YouTube short featuring Laura Bross called Just the Facts Information Processing Model. When you have a second, check it out. It's well worth watching. So according to the information processing model, our senses filter out much of the information around us. Some of this information goes into our working memory, and with effort, the learner can move information from working memory into long-term memory. Long-term memory is where information is organized and stored for future retrieval. It's like a seemingly limitless storage system, kind of like a giant filing cabinet in your brain, when information moves from working memory into long-term memory, this is what we call learning. However, the movement of information from working memory into long-term memory in this process, working memory acts as a little bit of a bottleneck. It can limit the path of information into that long-term memory, and too much load on working memory can prevent information from being stored, causing what we call cognitive overload. And as educators, we can make instructional decisions to reduce or optimize that, to optimize student learning and prevent cognitive load. And here's what's really important to note. It's not just about what we teach, but how we teach it. Explicit instruction has been validated over and over again in the research as the most effective and efficient procedure for teaching, particularly when learning new skills and strategies. All students benefit from explicit instruction, but for some students, it's essential for their reading, writing, and spelling development. There are two sets of skills involved in proficient writing, transcription skills and translation skills. So transcription skills we see at the top here in blue. This is the process and physical acts of representing sounds to written symbols. So this includes things like spelling, convention knowledge, handwriting skills, eventual keyboarding. And then we have our translation skills on the bottom represented in yellow. And this is really the generation and organization of ideas. It involves things like grammar, syntax in sentences, text structure, and the writing process in general. This graphic has been adapted from a resource shared during a webinar by Dr. Anita Archer that she gave in 2023, entitled The Science of Reading and the Science of Instruction, Both Are Imperative. I took that graphic and mapped the Ontario curriculum expectations, writing expectations, and the grades in which they appear onto it. And we show this tonight just to punctuate the point that these skills are the skills that make up the majority of our D strand of our writing curriculum, and also a lot of our B strand as well. And so we see these skills show up, the transcription skills and the translation skills, in the simple view of writing model. I'm Guessing that most people here tonight are familiar with the simple view of reading. And if you haven't seen it before, this is the simple view of writing, first proposed by Virginia Berninger in 2002. The original simple view of reading is a theoretical framework focused on writing as the product of two necessary sets of skills, those lower level transcription skills, so spelling, handwriting, keyboarding, and our text generation or translation skills. And what this framework suggests is that they're both two critical yet separate aspects of writing that lead to fluent and skilled writing. So students need to be proficient in both of these areas to be skilled writers. And then the simple view of writing was expanded in 2006 by Berninger and Wynne to the not so simple view of writing. The model still identifies those text generation skills, that transcription in the blue, and our text generation, our translation skills in the yellow. But the authors expanded the framework by adding and emphasizing executive function skills and working memory. This is really where we see the self-regulation aspect of thinkSRSD approach really come into play. Writing is an area that is often quite challenging for students because of the demands on working memory and executive functioning. The rules and expectations of our spoken language and our written language are very different. Generally speaking, we are lazy speakers. We cut corners, we rely on facial expressions, intonation, body language, we use slang. Written language, on the other hand, is much more complex because it's more formal and follows more spoken or more formal rules than our spoken language. There are also a lot of demands on our working memory when we're writing. We need to think about what we know about the topic, the writing genre. We need to take into account the audience. And as such, it's much less demanding to retrieve information from our long-term memory than to have to hang on to something new in our working memory. And this is why writing about what we know and having a lot of background knowledge to pull from is so much easier, and why it's so important to build up that content knowledge and background knowledge on a topic before writing. So now that we have built a little bit of a collaborative understanding around cognitive load theory, the theoretical models of writing, and have a bit of a glimpse into why writing is so challenging for students, we're now going to introduce you to the thinkSRSD approach of teaching writing. So self-regulated strategy development, or SRSD, is a structured and explicit instructional approach designed to help students improve their writing skills by teaching them both writing and self-regulation skills. It was first developed by Dr. Karen Harris, Dr. Steve Graham, and colleagues in 1982. So we're talking over 4 decades of research and work here. And it was initially designed to meet the needs of students with severe learning difficulties. Students are explicitly taught strategies to support their writing, and self-regulation skills are woven throughout. The SRSD model focuses on providing students with clear and simple strategies to support their writing, while also teaching them how to plan, how to monitor, and evaluate their progress as they write. Generally speaking, according to Dr. John Hattie, anything over a 0.4 effect size has what's called a desired effect. 0.4 to 0.6 shows a moderate effect, and anything above 0.6 shows a large effect. Effect sizes in SRSD research are typically quite large, exceeding 0.85 in meta-analyses, and commonly ranging from 1.0 to 2.55 across writing and effective outcome measures. And I love this quote by Dr. Steve Graham. He says, SRSD is grounded in so much research and has been proven to enhance writing by integrating strategies, self-regulation, and cognitive processes, making it a scientifically supported teacher method. So then we have thinkSRSD. thinkSRSD is a brand and educational resource that applies the self-regulated strategy development model to help students improve their writing skills. It was developed by Dr. Leslie Lott and Punjab Patel in 2006 and is constantly being refined. It's grounded in the work of Harris and Graham's instructional SRSD model and augmented by Dr. Charles Haynes's sentence and word level instruction. So basically what thinkSRSD has done is they've taken the SRSD approach and developed resources that streamline the work for practical classroom use. It's a flexible and adaptable framework that works with any curriculum. So regardless of if you're French immersion, French first language, English, if you're in Ontario or Nova Scotia or BC, it can really fold over any current curriculum that you have. thinkSRSD translates research into practice, focusing on providing educators with tools, strategies, and supports to implement SRSD effectively in the classroom. So a recent independent review of the efficacy of thinkSRSD found that all grades studied, so K to 12, showed at least a 6% improvement in the percentage of students reaching grade level expectations. And across standardized tests, improvements range between 5.6 and 8.23, suggesting that thinkSRSD can lead to meaningful improvements in the percentage of students meeting grade level benchmarks across a variety of state tests. Now, these studies were done in the United States with American standardized tests, but I can't help but think about the connection with these findings and our own standardized tests in Ontario here, EQAO. So thinkSRSD takes the writing process and it really breaks it down into a clear, explicit framework for both students and teachers. Let's face it, there are probably very few of us here tonight who were really taught how to teach writing. And if you're anything like I was, you're dying for some kind of a roadmap or guide. And I think that thinkSRSD really does offer that roadmap. And it's so steeped in decades of research and evidence that you can feel confident that if you commit, you do the work, and you trust the process, your teaching and, more importantly, your students' writing will improve. The thinkSRSD approach incorporates consistent routines and frameworks that are used over and over again in what is called the power cycle. And Jordan's going to get into the power cycle in depth with you. So through this consistency in teaching and learning and through consistent scaffolded support, the goal of the approach is that these routines and scaffolds are so practiced year after year that they become ingrained into habits of mind that students can use with independence and confidence. A simple Google search for graphic organizers brings up thousands of different variations in a matter of seconds. Which one do you choose? Which one is the best for your students? And if I choose to use a few with my students in grade 3, and the next year they move to Jordan's class in grade 4, and he may choose some different organizers that are supposed to fulfill the same purpose, but are structured differently. So what this means is that Jordan needs to reteach and the students need to relearn a new way of doing things. So remember that cognitive load we talked about earlier? Here's a prime example of that. But just imagine a school or a board, if you will, where the same simple, consistent organizers were used year after year, starting with that oral foundation in kindergarten. What would it look like by the time the students got to me in grade 3 and had a solid 3 or 4 years of that consistent structure, vocabulary practiced over and over again? Imagine how much instructional time it would save and how much cognitive space it would free up in our students' brains and in our brains as well as teachers, so that they can focus on the really challenging task of writing increasingly complex and nuanced texts. And that's what the thinkSRSD approach attempts to do. So this is the framework of thinkSRSD, and it outlines what you teach. With time, practice, and explicit writing instruction, this framework leads to independent and skilled writers because students internalize the tools and direct themselves through the writing process. Regular skill building is explicitly taught throughout each cycle, and the work and learning is embedded into content, meaning that as teachers with this cross-curricular approach, we're not only covering more expectations, but we're also working to help move all of that information, not just the writing information, into that long-term or learning memory. So first we have power. This helps students track where they are in the writing process, and almost every expectation in our Ontario D1 and D2 strand are covered within this process of power. Then we have the toolkit. So a simple strategy toolkit for each part of the writing process, which builds to eventual independence. This teaching and learning provides students with an invisible toolkit, if you will, that they can dip into anytime they need to use it. The tools are simple but effective. And this will help reduce that cognitive load and give us our biggest bang for our instructional buck. And then we have the daily embedded skill building, which helps equip students with the skills and strategies that they need to independently write strong and increasingly complex pieces of writing. Here we teach them the skills that they need to be able to write compellingly at all levels, the word level, sentence level, and larger connected pieces as well. And then finally, the thinkSRSD framework rests on a bed of self-regulation. Every day we are thinking out loud. Students, they often think that we just know how to read and how to write or how to do math and that we're just naturally good at it. And if they don't feel success at it, if it doesn't come easily to them, that growth or that fixed mindset can grow. So by using the thinkSRSD approach and really digging into that self-regulation piece, we teach in such a way that we almost peel back the layers of our brain and make our thinking visible. We talk through how we self-regulate ourselves when doing this really hard work. And students will see that and begin to integrate that into their own processes, which will support eventual independence with the writing process. So this helps get them to the point of agency and empowerment. We have, during the skill building phase of the framework, different tools and resources can be used to explicitly teach a wide variety of skills. We've done a lot of work in Limestone with the Writing Revolution. It layers beautifully with thinkSRSD. The syntax project is also heavily used in our district, and it can also be integrated with this work. So it's not an either or approach, but more of both.
Thanks, Erika. So now we're going to take you into the thinkSRSD power cycle. And the thinkSRSD power cycle consists of three main phases. So we have teach, model, and then score. And then within that, we find our power acronym. So the P stands for plan or prepare. The O stands for organize. The W stands for write. The E is edit, and the R is revise. And you'll notice that the E in power is lowercase while the R is uppercase. And this is to signal to students the difference between the two, but also to show that we're placing a little more emphasis on the revisions to our writing. So throughout the cycle and through repeating the cycle, students build self-regulation within the context of writing, as can be seen through the arrows in the diagram. Consistency really is key to the cycle, as this reduces that cognitive load piece that Erika was taking us through earlier. So to kick off the cycle, and before we jump into prepare or plan, we start with the teaching phase. And here we teach the content, build knowledge, and create shared experiences to write about. It's really about leveling the playing field. We want all students coming to the table with consistent background knowledge that has been built through our learning. And this can come from a social studies lesson, a science experiment, a field trip. We want all students engaging in the writing process to have equal footing in terms of what they can draw from when it comes to their writing. And this is also where writing can be cross-curricular. thinkSRSD's free baseline diagnostic assessments are a great way to build background knowledge together. So they're available for all grades K to 8 and include the texts, the supplementary videos, the prompts, the exemplars. It's not a reading comprehension task, hence the videos and the multiple texts. We're really looking at student writing, but want to build that shared content knowledge together through a variety of sources. And what's great is that the texts and exemplars are then used in the first introductory power cycle. ONlit has also adapted these same resources to French using the same themes and topics as the English materials, which is really exciting. So in quatrième année, for example, the texts Les Héros de la Nuit and Les Maîtres de la Nuit explore the topic of nocturnal animals, which is the same as the grade 4 English pre-assessment. So these can be found under Écrire avec thinkSRSD in the ONlit resource library or Bibliothèque de ressources in French. So after the pre-teaching, step 1 is where we find the P and the O of power, which stand for planning and prepare, as well as organize, which fall into the D1 strand of our language curriculum. So the P, as I said, is plan or prepare, and there's a lot packed into the P. So we start with positive self-talk, which is not officially part of thinkSRSD's P. It's something that we've added in, but it really just goes to show how it's a framework and how it can be tweaked and adjusted. This edition addresses student confidence with writing tasks, and in this stage, students come up with and internalize positive self-talk phrases such as "I've got this" or "I can do hard things" for when they navigate the cycle. After that, we have pre-read for the gist, and this is all about pulling out the main idea of the text and is very similar to paragraph shrinking or oral paragraph shrinking. The gist is a strategy to support students as they do the hard work of summarizing. So students pick out the most important who or what, did what, when and where, why, what happened, and then they craft this into one cohesive sentence. An example of a gist with a text about the hunting patterns of octopuses may be, "Octopuses travel in the sea so they can find food." We want to normalize the gist as much as possible. So after a read aloud, have students give you a gist of the book or the chapter. After a science text, really use every opportunity you can to bring gist work into your everyday. And then in kinder and early primary, the gist might just be a who or a what, did what, when and where, and that's it. An example using our same octopus text could be, "Octopuses travel in the sea." And then in the next P, we pull apart the prompt using the do what strategy. So if our prompt was, "Describe what octopuses can do to protect themselves," support your answer with details from both texts, we have to ask ourselves, what do we have to do? So first off, we have to describe, and second, we have to support. And then what are we describing? How octopuses protect themselves, and what are we supporting? Our answer with details from the text. This provides students with a clear direction of what to write about, and students are encouraged to refer back to it often to remind themselves of why they are writing. And then with the do what strategy established, students then have a clear expectation of what they need for idea generation, and then for picking ideas, which is our last P in our planning phase. Here we can see the various elements of the planning or prepare phase in action. So students check off each of the elements as they complete them. They organize their elements of the gist in a table before crafting a complete sentence that summarizes the topic. Teachers use co-created tables to pull apart the prompt using the do what strategy. Lots of ways to make this planning phase accessible for all as we set students up for their writing. And then next we have O, which stands for organize, which can also be found in the D1 strand of our language curriculum. And TIDE is where you organize ideas. So TIDE can be used for expository pieces, narrative writing, recounts, persuasive writing, all text forms in the curriculum. The T stands for topic introduction, the I is important evidence, the D is detailed examination, and E is for end. We also have an L for language box, and this is where we integrate explicit vocabulary instruction and challenge students to use that vocabulary in their writing. And then the acronym with the L then becomes TIDE-L. It's important to note that TIDE-L is a framework that is very versatile, and it allows for natural differentiation between and even within classrooms. So depending on the needs of your student, a teacher might choose to live in TIE or TIE for a few cycles before weaving in the D or the detailed examination. And then C space is for fiction writing. Our presentation this evening will focus mostly on TIDE-L as it's the most versatile and widely applicable structure. So we won't dive too deeply into C space this time. However, it is important to note that C space can be used to map fiction first before students eventually write their own, which can be very tricky. But by breaking down the parts into clear, manageable elements, C-Space helps students understand how effective writing is constructed before using it to plan, write, and craft their own original fiction. This approach really gives students a clear starting point and builds confidence by making the writing process more structured and explicit. It allows students to move from that analysis to creation in a scaffolded, supported way. And there are many variations that can be found of the TIDE and C-Space organizers. We chose just two to show you today. The important thing is that the framework stays consistent. So choose one that works for you and use it consistently. It's also important to remember that these organizers are scaffolds. So the goal is for students to have so much explicit instruction and practice with TIDE-L or with C-Space that they begin to internalize the structure and can eventually get to the point of jotting it down on a piece of scrap paper or a sticky note without the actual scaffold of the organizer. This is obviously not going to happen overnight. Consistency and continuity is key, and remember that they're tools in the toolkit that we want students to pull out when they need them. This is an example of what it might look like when a student utilizes Tide on a piece of scrap paper to organize their ideas, or when a student uses the do what strategy to pull apart the prompt. This is that transfer of skill when scaffolds are removed and students have internalized the structures that have been learned through multiple cycles. And then next we have step 2, which introduces exemplars before writing more. And exemplars drive the instruction. In the write more stage, we start with collaborative writing, eventually pulling that scaffold away. Exemplars show kids where they are going big picture. The exemplar drives everything. So it makes explicit the success criteria so we can put students in the driver's seat of their own learning. And right now we're creating exemplars using AI, but the goal would be to have a bank of them so that eventually we could use real student work in future years. When creating exemplars, we look at students' writing and dig into the curriculum to see what writing or thinking skills we want to explicitly teach and have students engage in. We explicitly teach these skills, then show an exemplar of these skills being used, and then students put that learning directly into practice in the write more stage of the power cycle. Throughout the year, you keep analyzing and dissecting exemplars over and over again to look at different and deeper kinds of analysis, or to look at how grammar and syntax, punctuation can better shape the meanings that we want to convey. The goal here is really to demystify what effective writing looks like and to show students in the very beginning. And then after explicit instruction with exemplars, the students put the teaching and the learning into practice in the write more section of Power. It starts with a lot of collaborative writing, and at first students will just copy down the ideas that you are writing, but then eventually as confidence and independence grows, students will start to create their own writing. And this is where you move from the planning on Tide to cohesive connected writing. Continuing on with step 2, write more, it's important to model coping strategies and skills throughout the process. Writing is hard work. We want to make that thinking visible by thinking aloud with our students. So there's a quote from page 70 of Releasing Writers that tells us, pause and act distracted, or nervously say, I'm stuck. I don't know how to make this really good. We want to let students into the process of thinking through a piece of writing and equip them with their own internal monologue to navigate their writing when it becomes difficult. This brings us to step 3, scoring and goal setting. So step 3 is all about student-centered assessment, and the focus is on scoring, not on evaluation. The purpose of scoring is to deepen understanding of effective features of writing so that students can better work toward meeting their self-set goals. The scoring of exemplars is a tool to support eventual self-scoring. So here you'll find an image of the goal setting menu, which looks different and has different criteria depending on the grade level. This initial criteria is just a small percentage of good writing. It's a necessary first step, and there are certain criteria that we can help students identify in their writing to get started. The criteria will shift and grow as our students grow and as the writing gets more complex and more nuanced. But when we first start, students need to understand the structure of writing before they can take those creative next steps. And then an important part of the cycle is scoring a strong exemplar together as a class. Our purpose here is to show what great writing looks like, to build and deepen understanding of criteria, but also to get students comfortable with scoring and giving feedback. We can see our rocket in the right-hand corner of this slide, and this is a visual way for students to score. So the colors represent the various elements of Tide that are present in the exemplar. The green at the top is our topic introduction. The yellow is important evidence, the I. The orange is the detailed examination. And then at the bottom, we have our red, which is our ending. If any sections were not colored in, that would reveal our next step in terms of having all of the components of TIDE. In this exemplar, all of the elements of TIDE are present, so all of them are colored in our rocket. Our next step for this student might be now to look at the quality of writing. So perhaps the topic introduction can be bumped up a bit. We can suggest that the student use a sentence type in their hook, such as an interrogative or an exclamatory sentence, for example, or perhaps they can use an imperative sentence to finish out their paragraph with an impactful call to action. Maybe we're also working on adding transition words to make the piece more cohesive. And then it's also important to score a below-level exemplar, which is meant to represent a student who hasn't learned TIDE yet. So we want to get students comfortable with scoring and giving feedback, and we also want to collaboratively work through the revising and the editing process. This is where that ER of power naturally gets integrated and can be explicitly taught. The rocket provides a clear visual of what is missing or lacking in our writing. So in this rocket, the writing is missing a topic introduction, which would be green at the very top, and a detailed examination, orange, after the first important evidence, after that first yellow. And this will be our focus for our revision stage. thinkSRSD notes that in their experience, it takes several collaborative scoring sessions with exemplars until students can effectively score. For some, it will take fewer cycles, for others, it may be more. But once students can effectively and accurately score, they can then transition into self-scoring their own pieces of writing and begin to score and provide feedback to their classmates. And then as students begin to self-evaluate their writing, they will begin to see themselves meeting criteria at different paces. Some will master the initial criteria right away, and some will take longer. Therefore, the goals become differentiated, with goals being individualized. The feedback that teachers give is also individualized and supported by the goal setting. Scoring really gives students a vehicle to zoom in their observations and focus their lenses so that they can set their goals and grow. Student goals should initially tie to the elements on the scale so that they can measure their progress to them. And then as their writing improves, their goals become less tangible and more nuanced. At first, it's all about having all of the parts, and then the art and the craft of writing becomes more prevalent. The goal setting, it strengthens the agency, the self-efficacy, self-regulation, and learning skills. And then what's great is that the goals at the end of the last power cycle, whether it be individual student goals or whole group goals, are brought forward into the next power cycle. These can be integrated into whole group explicit instruction. So for example, if you notice that most students need work on having a clear ending, your next cycle could focus on exactly that. Or it can also be used for individual feedback. So for example, a few students in your class could have a specific goal around adding more transition words to their writing. This makes things really clear for both you and your students. It supports continual improvement, and it fosters goal setting, metacognition, reflection, and overall self-efficacy. The goal at the end of the last power cycle feeds forward into the next cycle, and writing gradually improves. And then one of the main goals of thinkSRSD is to get to self-instruction. They call it the black box inside the mind that directs what we do and how we do it. Students start by saying things like, I can do it, but then that transitions and grows into using self-talk phrases to list specific strategies that they can use as they work through the process. For example, a student might eventually get to the point of saying, I will use power and TIDE to guide me, and I will look at exemplars if I start to feel stuck. This is deep work and will require a lot of time and a lot of modeling from educators, but we are seeing it come to fruition in Limestone as we navigate our second year with thinkSRSD. So teachers model self-regulation and self-instruction, thinking aloud while writing. You say the kinds of thoughts that your students are actually and really thinking. These modeled think alouds should happen regularly, formally at first, and then spontaneously as you begin to use SRSD regularly. This way, you are teaching students how to guide themselves cognitively, to encourage themselves, and to follow the easy to recall steps whenever they write.
So for the next few sections, we're going to take you through a bit of a glimpse into thinkSRSD at the district and classroom level with Limestone. But it's really important to note that although some of what we're going to show you is based on how the Limestone District School Board implemented thinkSRSD at the district level, a single teacher working in isolation can absolutely successfully use this in their classroom. There are so many free, readily available resources online, including those at ONlit. So teachers working independently can make thinkSRSD and SRSD effective for their students in their classroom. So we started with a pilot project last year with 30 educators from across 18 schools. To give you a bit of perspective, Limestone's 51 elementary schools in total. We focused in on junior teachers, so teachers in the grade 4, 5, 6 space. We had English to French immersion teachers, an MLL teacher, French immersion teacher as well. Our learning partners, including Jordan, was involved in the learning. And our first day of learning was with thinkSRSD virtually in the fall. And then we had 2 other full days of professional learning throughout the year, kind of mid-year and end of year, that were run by me. It's important, I said this before, to note that we really dug into the writing revolution as a school board for about 2 years before starting around 2023 with various professional learning opportunities for teachers grade 1 to grade 9. And as a result, when we began our thinkSRSD pilot, we had some educators who had done previous writing revolution work with us. And this was a really great opportunity because during the pilot, they were able to share how they were weaving both of those approaches together. And I've said this before, but it's not an either or, but a both approach. One of the things we heard loud and clear from the educators after our first launch session in the fall was they said it took a long time. And of course, anything new comes with a lot of cognitive load. So things are going to feel more laborious. They're going to take more time. We are building our fluency and our automaticity with these tasks and these processes, these mnemonics, just as much as the students are doing that as well. However, it is absolutely also fair that the time is a precious commodity in the classroom, and the pressure to fit it all in is really real. So at our second learning session we had together, I engaged the teachers in a really powerful activity where we mapped the curriculum expectations of the D strand onto the power cycle. And almost every expectation within the D strand, so 11 out of 14 to be exact, were covered when working through a full power cycle and if you took a piece to presentation. So this was a really big eye opener for our educators. Furthermore, we worked through a power cycle with a rich mentor text, the one on the screen that you see here, We Are Water Protectors by Carol Lindstrom. So depending on what text you choose for the power cycle or the prompt that you focus on, other expectations can also be drawn out through your explicit teaching throughout the process. So point of view, for example, or literary devices. And with this rich mentor text, an additional 15 expectations were hit. So that's a total of 26 curriculum expectations in one power cycle. So all of that to say that the time it takes is well spent, not only on the writing, but also on other areas of the curriculum as well. Here are just a few pictures showing students engage collaboratively in this work. Also, as we mentioned previously, the cross-curricular connections that can be made with the SRSD approach allows us to better wrap our heads as educators around breaking down those kind of imaginary invisible silos, those subject block silos that we have, and breathe literacy into other subject areas in all parts of the day. Here you'll see some photos of how teachers are bringing SRSD work into the science block, working on the gist with a science-based mentor text, and then leveraging that work to help them dig into a written response question around the character of a book. This is a pre-assessment of a student in a grade 3 class using thinkSRSD diagnostic about ants. And at first glance, if we go by quantity alone, it can look like a decent attempt by a middle of year grade 3 student. However, upon closer inspection, we can see that the same idea is repeated. Also, if we layer on the thinkSRSD color coding that Jordan talked to you about earlier, we can see that the student has a solid understanding of a strong paragraph structure, though the ideas are minimal and underdeveloped. This is the same student. This is an end of March assessment. So we're talking here, if you take out March break, about 6 to 8 weeks of really solid instruction. You can see that we have multiple ideas that not only give facts from the text, but also include the student's own knowledge, analysis, and additional supporting details. So a huge improvement in a really short time. The classroom teacher has also reported that this student has moved from a reluctant writer to a motivated writer, even choosing to write during indoor recesses and free time. So lots to those anecdotal observations are important, and lots to celebrate here for sure. Here's a quote from one of our junior teachers involved in the pilot. It's just one of a couple quotes we're going to share with you today, because we thought it was important to really capture some educator and student voice around thinkSRSD. So this 5-6 teacher says, in just a few months, I've seen huge improvements in my students' ability to write structured, detailed paragraphs using the thinkSRSD method. It has also helped me with my literacy planning. I have a guideline to follow that can be easily integrated with science and social studies. We now also use just statements to help us summarize our read alouds and tasks in math. So remember that roadmap that I talked about during the introduction? I love how this quote really shows that the thinkSRSD framework helps make things clear and systematic, not only for students, but for educators as well. And this is one of the students. Getting students to move beyond summarizing is really, really hard. And here Chloe tells us just how thinkSRSD approach has helped her with this challenging skill. She says, thinkSRSD helps me to do more than just summarize. It shows me how to write more and how to organize my writing in a way that makes sense. So the fact that Chloe can communicate this so well really shows us the level of deep understanding and metacognition that thinkSRSD helps provide students.
So next we'll be looking at some classroom level work with thinkSRSD. And in this section, we are specifically looking at the work of 2 English to French immersion teachers at a dual track school within the Limestone District School Board. And these teachers implemented thinkSRSD into their grades 3 to 6 classes throughout our pilot project last year. They engaged in work with an LDSB learning partner, that would be me, in November of 2024. And a lot of their work was done in classrooms. However, they really took to heart the collaborative nature of collaborative writing and the collaborative aspect of thinkSRSD by engaging in collaborative writes by bringing together grade-alike classes into their school's learning commons. So students in different classes read the same text, they completed the P and the O individually, and then they came together and compared their P and their O with students from the other class in small groups. And then together they wrote one text while discussing which ideas should be included, which would best support their argument, and which would best respond to the prompt. And then by the end of June, classes had completed approximately 7 full cycles in total throughout the school year. The process began with a lot of modeling writing at the beginning of the year, and then it transitioned into shared and collaborative writing. And then by June, they had reached the point where for some students, scaffolds were slowly starting to be removed, with some students beginning to write independently. With increased familiarity with the processes and the structure strengthening and becoming more automatic, their focus then shifted to peer feedback and goal setting, which continued into this school year. This works to both normalize feedback as constructive to writing and also to organically drive the next power cycle by keeping the momentum and the engagement going. These 2 teachers have also continued with the work into this school year. They hit the ground running in September and reported that their students retained much of the structures and the processes learned last school year, and now they're using as a vehicle for learning this year, which is really great feedback. After working through multiple cycles, these 2 English to French immersion teachers credit the success of the implementation of thinkSRSD in their classrooms to spending significant amounts of time in routines 1 and 2. This required a lot of front loading, but set a solid foundation for routines 3 to 6 to follow. Specifically, they spent a lot of time working with the exemplars from the pre-assessment and familiarizing themselves with the tools available. They also slowed down and guided students to observe effective elements in exemplar texts rather than just pointing them out for them. During the planning and organizing phase, they place significant emphasis on explaining the importance of planning and on organizing, as well as explicitly modeling these skills to students. By slowing things down, students became familiar with the consistent structure, the consistent approach, the tools, and then this provided them with a solid foundation to build on. So the takeaway here is really to go as fast as you can, but as slow as you need to with your students. And then educators noted from the pre-assessment that students were mostly just writing a summary, taking the important evidence from the text with no real detailed examination with the student's own thinking. Their writing mostly consisted of facts and quotes, words or phrases taken directly from the text, or events of specific details summarized, which when scored appeared as mostly yellow. They didn't see much of the student's own thinking about the facts, which would score as orange, which becomes more of an expectation around grade 4. The photo on the left is our before sample, and the photo on the right is our after sample. We can see here that this student moved from summarizing to actually presenting a topic sentence with supporting details. The student has made a point to add in detailed examination, which is the orange, in response to the facts from the text. They've also moved beyond strictly writing about details taken directly from the text, which is the yellow. Here we can also see that the quality of writing is improving, not just the quantity. Visually, we can see more of our colors from Tide represented in the second sample to the right. And then teachers have also noticed growth in idea generation. So we can see on the left in our before sample that this student left a few sections blank. And then comparatively in their after sample, this student was not only able to craft the components of their gist into a fully formed sentence, but they were also able to pick out significantly more ideas in the box at the bottom of the page. This next pre-assessment shows us a lot of the same. So this student is mostly writing a summary with some of their own thinking, some orange in the middle. And then in this sample taken from April of 2025, a few months after the initial pre-assessment, we can see that now this student has significantly more writing. They spent a lot more time building out their green and their red, meaning their topic introduction and their ending. We can see that the orange is interspersed. So the student is using sentence stems like this implies that, or this symbolizes, to bring in their own thinking into their writing, as well as demonstrating a more profound comprehension and understanding of the content. And as educators, this provides more of an insight into what the student understands, but also how the student is understanding the content, which is incredibly valuable. And then what we really wanted to highlight here in this sample is that the green feedback that we see is student-to-student feedback. So this shows how explicit feedback has become normalized in this classroom. And when students work together, they are crystal clear about what they need to do, what good writing looks like, and what feedback they can give their peers to help them improve. And then this alleviates that dependence on the teacher and allows students to take charge of their own learning and writing success. We also wanted to highlight for our French immersion colleagues that ONlit has worked with Dr. Laud to release official translated versions of thinkSRSD materials. So the framework is the same with some slight adjustments to acronyms. Instead of power, we have PORA, which is a nonsense word, which stands for préparer, rédiger, améliorer, réviser, et relire. And then Tide L remains the same with the same acronym of TIDEL, representing thème, information, détail, en conclusion, et langage. And then here we can see some examples of some of the materials available through ONlit. This includes the texts, the exemplars, the graphic organizers for all grades K to 8, everything you need to get started on your thinkSRSD journey in your French classroom. Here we have some photos of a thinkSRSD inspired bulletin board in a grade 4 French classroom. The educator has the elements of Pora and Tide posted and references them often to contextualize the work being done and where it fits into the larger process. They've also displayed in banque de début de phrase that are color-coded for each of the elements of Tide that students reference while writing. It's been really interesting to see the accelerated growth with English to French immersion teachers and French classroom teachers in our board, both using thinkSRSD with the same group of students. The process is the same. Students work through the parler positif, écrire un essentiel, décomposer ou parcelliser la tâche, un mot qu'on utilise en limestone pour garder le thème des mots qui commencent par P, et proposer les idées dans la section de planification ou P. Students are building the same skills in both languages simultaneously. The process becomes twice as familiar to them, which reduces that cognitive load and works toward the goal of automaticity. Students are receiving 2 times the exposure while acting as experts and leaders in their second language because they know the process. The result is that writing in both languages is progressing simultaneously, as learning in one language advances learning in the other. The two really do work together to accelerate growth and progress student writing. And then here we have a quote from Zane in grade 3. Zane says, "Every time I write one of these paragraphs, I just get better and better." And we love this quote because it really captures the enthusiasm and the motivation that students feel when they find success as a result of repeating the process multiple times. Students invest in the process when they see their writing getting better after every cycle. And then this is a quote from a grade 6-7 educator who commented on their students' experience with thinkSRSD and said they're starting to use the mnemonics and vocabulary when giving each other feedback, which is really cool. I find the process of scoring has removed the element of perceived criticism to their writing. They're giving better feedback, but also receiving feedback in a more positive and constructive way. So this really speaks to the positive culture and openness surrounding feedback that is created when engaging in the work, which then bleeds into other subject areas and can be leveraged for responsive goal setting and continual improvement over time.
I actually received this email unsolicited just a couple weeks ago. A teacher sent it to me, and I think it speaks to the power of self-efficacy and what students who have been explicitly taught and they know exactly what to do, how they feel successful. They feel successful when they're doing it, and so their love of a task, even writing, grows, even to the point of making Tide rockets at home, apparently, which is very cool. So we've learned a lot over the last couple of years. We are well into our second year officially of thinkSRSD and Limestone, and we have the benefit of a year of reflection and experience that we wanted to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. Last year, at the end of the pilot, we asked teachers to share some key takeaways. We wanted to share them with you today, because if you're looking at implementing thinkSRSD in your classroom, school, or district, here are just a few words of wisdom from our teachers who are doing this work.
So first, the prompt matters. So we want to anticipate how students will interpret the prompt, but we also want to ensure that they can pull apart the prompt and apply the do-what strategy. So use prompt terms such as analyze, identify, describe, explain, compare. Because the prompt shapes how students will think, respond, and demonstrate their understanding, thoughtful prompt design sets the stage for a strong cycle to follow. So choosing the right prompt can feel daunting at first, especially as a teacher when you're doing it on your own. And sometimes we don't always get it right. What's important to remember is that we are learning too. And so if the prompt doesn't quite work, then we refine it and we adapt it for next time. It really is a learning process for everyone, but the prompt really does matter. Next, a solid foundation of shared background knowledge is key to write more. So using videos, podcasts, picture books, multiple texts on the same topic to build shared knowledge and context is key. Then students write to learn. An important step in this is to really spend some time creating a clear gist statement that captures the source material, including cross-curricular content such as articles. And then takeaway number 3 is that sentence stems are essential to idea generation. It's a common belief that sentence stems are reserved for primary grades, and we often begin to take the scaffold away as students progress into junior and intermediate grades. Junior and intermediate teachers, however, have found that sentence stems are an incredibly effective strategy at getting a starting point for their students and getting ideas flowing. So over time, students will then internalize these structures the more that they use them, eventually using them independently. But it's important to provide them for them when they are first starting to write. These are some examples of sentence stems for each of the sections of TIDE in a junior classroom, and these can be co-created and used as anchor charts throughout the year as they're applicable to any text. The next takeaway is that teacher feedback is now direct and specific. No more spending hours marking writing. So in this photo, we can see that the teacher's feedback was simply to write topic sentence and then to reference the do-what strategy of pulling apart the prompt. Because students have built up this knowledge of what a topic sentence is, and they know the do-what strategy, they can revise based on this very brief feedback. They have the tools that they need to take this little nugget of information and apply it to improve their writing. And then lastly, the last takeaway here is remember the art of teaching. thinkSRSD is more than just going through the motions and going through the cycle over and over and over and over again. Teaching is responsive. Student engagement and buy-in are important. So we want to use the power cycle in response to a video, a school event, or a shared classroom experience. We want to get creative with our prompts. We want to make our thinking visible. We want to remind students of why we do this and build that buy-in. We want to let students in on the goal that we eventually want them to be able to use power in their sleep. And then when students have all of the parts and all of the elements of power and TIDE L, we still continue with the cycle, but are now focused on more nuanced aspects of their writing and the art of writing, like tone, for example. The structure in the vehicle is always the same, but the learning within the cycle is ever evolving and changing.
As I mentioned earlier, we have the benefit of a second fall of engaging of thinkSRSD. And this is what the pilot teachers who engaged in this work last year are sharing with us. They're emailing us, so a year later, after the summer, to share their excitement about what they're seeing. When completing beginning of year assessments on text type knowledge, students who engaged with thinkSRSD last year retained a significant amount of information. The students reported that they felt more confident in writing than this time last year, as did the teachers, by the way. And we also are receiving reports of increased metacognition and awareness of the process of writing and that organic positive self-talk leading into multiple subject areas, not into writing. I got this from one of the teachers at the beginning of the year. He said, I don't know if I've ever seen this kind of retention before, which goes to show that thinkSRSD really does work wonderfully. I think it's important to mention that the teachers themselves are reporting, as I said, that they're feeling much more comfortable with the process this year than last. They built their fluency. So we asked them to trust the process, to put in the work, and they're reporting that they're so glad they did. So Jordan shared with you some words of wisdom from some classroom teachers engaged in this work. And here are just a few other things to remember that are more about the thinkSRSD approach in general, if you're thinking about implementing this in your school or your classroom or your district. So first and foremost, explicit teaching is key. One of the reasons SRSD and thinkSRSD are so powerful is because of the explicit teaching. Explicit instruction is intentionally woven in to every aspect of the process, from power to tide, from the gist to C-space. One of the misconceptions early on was that because of this embedded explicit instruction, just working through the power cycle was enough. Teachers actually forgot about that skill building pillar, that third pillar, and they weren't really sure where it fit in. So once we kind of reminded them about the importance of that, a third pillar, and they started to integrate that more intentionally, they reported that the quality of writing increased significantly. Second, thinkSRSD, SRSD, all writing floats on a sea of talk. Oral communication is the foundation of all learning. And in the thinkSRSD approach to teaching writing, students are constantly talking about what they've been learning about and what they're writing about. So talk is really, really important. If you can't talk about it, you can't write about it. Another thing to remember is that this can absolutely start in kindergarten and early primary grades, building that foundation and understanding of the acronyms and the process early. Fellow ONlit-org Kate Wynn, she does a beautiful job modeling this in her kindergarten classroom and often posts about her thinkSRSD journey on social media. Laura Bross is another one who does amazing work in her grade 2 classroom. We have a lot of early primary teachers in Limestone who are doing this work and are reporting really positive outcomes. And then finally, differentiation is easily embedded. So I spent a lot of my career working with struggling learners in an SST CERT role. And what I love about the thinkSRSD approach is that it can easily differentiate within the tasks. So even if you have a student in grade 6, for example, who is not yet ready for full tide, you can start with just a tie, or maybe they just have one D part of the D that they're doing and they're working on in their response. The important thing is this, that all students are still reading the same grade level text with support. They're building that same vocabulary, that content knowledge. They're part of the discussions together. And so this approach allows us to more easily meet students where they are and scaffold the learning as needed and appropriate. There are so many resources and supports out there to help a teacher who really wants to get started with this work. Provincially, there's lots of things available, more every day on ONlit. So we have the thinkSRSD free resources that are translated into French that Jordan talked about. In June 2025, thinkSRSD inspired grade 3 text sets in French and English are available. In December, the grade 9 unit 1 personal narratives and the power of memory were released also in French and English. And then we just released grade 5 and 6 unit 1, and more are coming very soon, like within the next couple days, right, Una? So grade 4, 5, and 6 inspired, all connected to the curriculum as well. And then we'd be remiss without talking about thinkSRSD and just sharing that. Just an FYI that thinkSRSD is undergoing a name change, and it's now called going to be called Releasing Writers. So you can see that on the screen there. It's going to take me a while to kind of get used to that shift, but just an FYI that both names are probably going to be used interchangeably for a while until the new name really takes hold. There is so much that can be done with the free resources, and specifically in the sharing groups on Facebook. If you're someone who mixes your social media and work, teachers in these groups are so generous with their time and sharing their experiences and resources. It's really a lovely community that's been built. So we encourage you to check that out. And then I put this in last minute. I texted Jordan yesterday. I was like, I know we're going to be over a little bit, but I think this is really important. I got this just a couple days ago from a teacher who just started the work this year. She started digging in the summer on her own. She said, we're reading The Long Way Down as we start our social justice book club. We're focusing on writing responses using a mini tide. This was our first whole class collaboration. We're going to see how it transfers over to questions related to their books. As soon as I said we were going to do a response with this prompt, a bunch of my kids who typically struggle with generating ideas wrote down do what in their notebook and the tide outline. It really is making an impact. Now, how do we get this to be whole board from K to 12? I wonder what my kids' writing would be like if I didn't have to spend so much time teaching them the power cycle at the beginning of the year. And so I think that just really speaks to the importance of consistency, continuity, and cohesion, and how if we're all on the same page and talking the same language, it's going to be so much easier for our students and for us. Again, very few of us in this room were taught how to teach writing. I never bring anything to the district that I don't think will be beneficial for students and for teachers. Our work is hard. The demands are high and seem to continue to grow every year. I see thinkSRSD as a way to streamline the incredibly complex process of teaching writing. It is a consistent, evidence-based strategy, rich approach that strips away the fluff and focuses on the important stuff. Thanks for taking time to share with us today, everyone. We really appreciate you being here.